thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and this is Arroyo Live. Produced by and through the facilities of Pasadena Media, the purpose of this program is to help enrich our community through informative and meaningful conversation. As a reminder, you can share your questions or comments with us anytime at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. You might have noticed our program has moved to a new night and time. We will now be on Thursday nights at 5 p.m. on this station. Tonight's program is a special installment and will feature a mixture of both live and pre-recorded interviews. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines government in part as a small group of persons holding simultaneously the principal political executive offices of a nation or other political unit, and being responsible for the direction and supervision of public affairs. It further explains the complex of political institutions, laws, and customs through which the function of governing is carried out. While a demanding environment under any circumstance, over the past 4 years, the U.S. government has endured a seemingly endless list of new and often unprecedented challenges, ranging from political meddling by foreign governments to the outbreak of a global pandemic and the race to create and distribute an effective vaccine, to an insurrection in the nation's capital, to the second impeachment of a sitting president, all during his first term in office. A recent study conducted by Pew Research Center found that 75% of Americans still trust the federal government, but it also found that number is shrinking. Tonight, we look at the state of our government. Joining me for this discussion will be Senator Anthony Portantino of California's 25th State Senate District, Congresswoman Judy Chu, U.S. Representative for California's 27th Congressional District, and Mr. Peter Dreier, Professor of Politics and Chair of the Urban and Environmental Policy Department at Occidental College. We begin tonight with Mr. Dreier. Thank you for being here. Please take a moment to give those at home a little more about your background.
Hi, Joe. It's good to be here. I've been teaching at Occidental for 27 years in the politics department. I came to California after serving as the deputy to the mayor of Boston for 8 years. So I've been involved in both teaching politics and doing politics. And since I moved to LA, I've been pretty involved in local politics here in Pasadena and in the LA area. And what's going on in the country right now is both shocking and at the same time not that surprising.
Well, there certainly has been a lot going on in the last couple of days, or in the last couple of weeks, and we definitely have a lot to discuss. As I did indicate early on in the program, some of our interviews will actually be taped this evening, so we do have interviews with Judy Chu and Anthony Portantino, and those we will be going to tape for. But before we get to that point, I just would like to ask you your thoughts on what we've seen the last couple of days.
Well, there's always a history in America of protests, dissent, starting with the Boston Tea Party and the abolition movement and the women's rights movement and the labor movement, environmentalism. We have a really proud tradition of protest. But what happened last week in Washington wasn't protest, it was insurrection. It was trying to overthrow the government, basically, and upend a formal election where President Trump lost and candidate Joe Biden won. And we're still trying to figure out, this is the first time that's happened in American history. There have been protests inside the Capitol building, but never led by the President of the United States, who was impeached for doing that. And so people are saying, well, when are we going to get back to normal? And I think we're never going to get back to normal. Whatever happens after Joe Biden is inaugurated is going to be a whole different kind of relationship between our government and the people, because we are now much more aware than we've ever been, certainly in my lifetime, probably in American history, of just how fragile our democracy is. I think there was a real wake-up call for the American people. and for many elected officials. And so we have to be much more vigilant, much more aware of how fragile things are, and get more involved. And I would anticipate that after Joe Biden is inaugurated, for the next generation, we're going to see growing turnout in elections, much more activism at the local and state level among people on different issues. And we're going to see a whole nother group of people running for office who are liberal or progressive and outraged at what happened. And we can talk later about what should happen to the president. But I think the bottom line is that we're going to be doing a lot of soul searching as a country about what was it about this insurrection and who participated in it, including some law enforcement officials, both inside the Capitol and who participated as part of the insurrectionists or the terrorists. So there's no going back to normal.
All right. Well, with that in mind, I think it's time to go to our interview with Congressman Judy Chu, and we'll be back in just a moment. Joining me now is Congresswoman Judy Chu. Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. How are you tonight?
Good.
Fantastic. Would you take a moment to share, I guess, with our viewers at home a little bit about your time in office and your accomplishments, please?
Well, it was in 2009 when President Obama made the amazing announcement that he was selecting Hilda Solis as his Secretary of Labor. That opened up the seat. I ran for Congress and I was able to make it. So now I'm in my 11th year in Congress. And during that time period, I have taken up the issues of the San Gabriel Valley very vigorously. We didn't have a small business development center, and yet I know that small businesses are at the key of the success of the San Gabriel Valley. So I fought to get 2 small business development centers here, and as a result, they can get the help that they need to be as successful as they can be. I also introduced several bills that improved access to capital for small businesses, and now small businesses can get the funds that they need to grow and expand. I was also very concerned about the fact that there was no healthcare center for veterans. And so I made this a very high priority to get a veterans healthcare clinic here in the San Gabriel Valley. I'm very proud to say that finally, 2 years ago, we were able to get one. It's a full service health center for them. But not only that, there are plans within the Veterans Administration to expand that to a bigger clinic within 3 to 5 years that would be permanent and have even more services. And finally, the San Gabriel Mountains are so important to this area, a jewel of the Los Angeles County area. So I fought very hard to get resources to the mountains. Finally, I was able to get President Obama to declare these mountains a national monument. And now I have a bill to expand this even further to make this a national recreation area. This bill did pass out of the House, but we still await a signing by the president.
Well, certainly a very, very busy and distinguished career. And again, we do thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Congresswoman, I know that you are very busy, so we'll get right to the questions here. The first one is talk of the impeachment, the second impeachment for this president in his first 4-year term in office, and quite possibly his only 4-year term in office. The question becomes, is impeachment relevant at this time? There's certainly a lot of debate on this particular topic, and I'd like to get your take on it.
Oh, it is so important to do at this particular time. I've just come from one of the toughest weeks that I've ever had in Congress. It started a week ago when we heard that mobs were storming the U.S. Capitol in attempts to stop the Electoral College from being certified. It was then that I had to hide in my office for several hours, terrified to open the door because I didn't know if rioters were on the other side waiting to attack, kidnap, or murder me. But actually, what happened to me was just the tip of the iceberg. These murderous mobs went into the US Capitol holding a noose to hang Vice President Pence and also targeting Speaker Pelosi. They destroyed so much that was in the Capitol, but also left 5 people dead. We have never seen a situation like this where the president, one branch of government, would incite a mob to attack another branch of government, and that is us in the Congress. The president radicalized these mobs so that they would do anything, including breaking the law and causing harm to others in order to carry out his deeds. This is why we had to get these impeachment proceedings going immediately, because this man is very, very dangerous. We never imagined that any decent human being would do this, let alone the president. So that's why we did the impeachment proceedings. We did get it to be a bipartisan vote with 10 Republicans joining us. It sent a very, very strong message that we will not tolerate this in our nation's capital.
So, how would you respond to the assertion by some members, particularly in the Republican Party, that this insistence on moving forward with this impeachment proceeding will only serve to further divide our country?
You know what's divisive? It is divisive when you keep on saying that the election was stolen and that the election results were a fraud. That is divisive because state after state did a recount. They did their due diligence. Every single lawsuit was struck down. And yet this president and his followers were continuing to say that the election was a fraud. And so that is what is at the heart of divisiveness. And that's what caused this unprecedented, shameful mob riot. And so what I hope is that the Republicans will stop saying that. That will end the divisiveness. What we need now is to move forward to say that this was wrong and then to move forward together to build back this country.
In the wake of yesterday's impeachment proceedings and the ultimate decision to move forward with that impeachment, there had been hopes that there would be at least 12 Republicans that would join the Democrats in siding for impeachment. As it stands, I believe there are only 10 so far, with one Senator Mitch McConnell undecided at this point. Certainly he hasn't said no, but he has not said yes. In the hours after that historic vote took place, reports began to surface that more Republicans might have sided with the idea of impeachment, except that, and again, this is not publicly stated, that they are in fear for their lives if they go against the president, and perhaps even of greater concern, his base. What are your feelings on that?
Well, that just shows how wrong this president is and why he has to be removed, because he claims that his freedom of speech is being curbed. What about the freedom of speech of all these Congress members? It is very, very true that there were many Congress members that would have voted for this impeachment, but were totally afraid for their own lives. And in fact, many of us are very concerned about our own safety as we walk around the Capitol, even in our own districts, because of the way that these mobsters have been riled up and whipped into a frenzy by this president. So that's what has to go away. That's why this president has to be removed.
Well, of course, even if the Senate were to move to convict, there would definitely be a hearing, and there would probably be arguments against that on behalf of the president from his team. One of the discussions that has been swirling of recent is concerns about the constitutionality of furthering or continuing to move forward with an impeachment of a president that's actually out of office. And as we have been told now, Mitch McConnell will not reconvene these hearings until after the inauguration of President Biden. Does this cause you concern at all?
Actually, there is nothing in the Constitution that says that you can't continue to have these hearings after the person is removed from office. And it did occur in other cases, though not with the president. So it has happened before. There is precedent. And I believe that it's important to continue to hold these hearings because, for one thing, this hearing could result in this president never being able to run for office again, which would be a benefit for this country.
What about concerns of violence concerning the inauguration of President Biden, which is, set to take place on the 20th of this month? Is that a concern, not only for the Biden administration, but for the members of Congress?
Yes, it is. And in fact, I've attended 2 security briefings so far by our top security officials, including the Secret Service, the FBI, Homeland Security, and so forth. Um, they described the protests that are being organized by the violent right-wing neo-Nazi extremists, and frankly, it frightened me. They are boasting that they will bring in thousands of people to surround the Capitol and to let in only Republicans into the Capitol and to stop Democrats from ever getting in. They are planning all kinds of violent protests and with a lot of specificity. That's what concerns me. However, I have to say that the security officials have quite a plan. They have perimeters. They've in fact enclosed the entire perimeter with an 8-foot non-scalable fence. They have 20,000 National Guardsmen that are coming into town, protecting us. That plus all their other plans are giving me confidence that we will be protected. I do have to say, though, that the essence of protection would be if the Republicans stopped saying that this election was stolen.
Well, certainly there are major news media outlets reporting at this hour, in fact, that the Capitol is already surrounded by the National Guard and will continue to be surrounded until after the inauguration, at the very least. What kind of a message does this send to not only the American people, but to the rest of the world about our democracy and where it stands?
We are at this moment in time where we are bringing in 20,000 National Guardsmen because of this president. This president incited these mobs of people to come in and do whatever it takes to undermine the election. So we know that this is a particular moment in time that is the result of 4 years of lies and whipping up the people. So I believe that in the future, with responsible presidents, with presidents who will tell the truth and who will actually try to unite the people, that we will not have to face such a dire situation again.
When the time comes that we finally do get to move forward, once Biden and Harris are inaugurated, and we can begin to move forward, I have a 2-part question. Firstly, is there a plan for the insurrectionists and the remainder of the Trump administration?
Well, the security officials are truly aggressive. The Department of Justice is going after all the insurrectionists. And thank goodness, there's an enormous amount of tape out there. So they're scouring that tape. In addition, these insurrectionists, these rioters, actually took many selfies and posted it themselves. Now, I understand that they're actually trying to take it down so that they will not be discovered. But there already is a tracking system that would allow the Department of Justice to be able to find out who they are. The Department of Justice is saying that by the end of this, many, many more people will be arrested than you could ever imagine. In addition, I want to have an investigation of the members of Congress who were actually complicit in this, because my understanding is that they were even giving tours to the rioters the day before to show them where exactly they should go in order to create the greatest harm.
Well, certainly some troubling ideas there that this could have had help from the inside. The follow-up or second part of this question would be, is there a plan to start trying to repair the fabric of our government and our country in the wake of this?
Absolutely. And in fact, this afternoon, President-elect Biden is unveiling a plan for another COVID relief package. And this COVID relief package will make sure that everybody gets a vaccine, that there will be a vigorous testing program, that we actually increase the stimulus payments that people so desperately need. And in fact, they would increase by $1,400 so that we would actually get to the $2,000 that would truly help people. And the unemployment benefit will increase so that the people out there can make ends meet. Also, the renters relief program will be actually implemented so that people will not be evicted and the eviction moratorium will be extended.
Congresswoman Chu, I know we're just about out of time. I wanted to ask one more quick question to bring things just a little more local. What is your outlook for the state of California moving forward?
I hope that we will turn a whole new page with this administration. The Trump administration actually attacked us many times. For instance, they attacked our clean air standards. We had clean air standards for vehicles that were coming out of California, and the Trump administration threatened to withhold highway funds, federal highway funds from us because of that. Also, what we've had these terrible wildfires this year, and they were trying to withhold federal disaster assistance to us. If you can imagine that, it wasn't until there was enormous pressure that they finally relented. So I think we can turn the corner and finally have an administration that is actually going to help us and help the people of California. I truly look forward to that.
Congresswoman Judy Chu, thank you so much. We've run out of time, but we really do appreciate you joining us this evening. We appreciate your thoughts and insights, and we want to thank you for your political service to our country.
Thank you so much.
We're talking with Mr. Peter Dreier, political professor at Occidental College, and we just got through watching our interview with Congresswoman Judy Chu. Mr. Dreier, I was wondering if we could get your thoughts on the relevance of moving forward with impeachment when it is clearly not going to be, the process, I should say, will not be completed before President Trump leaves the White House.
Well, we know that President Trump is never going to apologize for all of his crimes and corruption. He's never going to acknowledge it. And he's got to be punished. Impeachment is just one way to punish him. As soon as he leaves office, he'll be besieged with lawsuits in New York State and New York City by women that he sexually harassed, by creditors that he didn't pay. But this is all stuff that happened before he was president. But he's got to be punished. So I think there has to be an impeachment trial and a conviction after Joe Biden is inaugurated. But I actually hope that that Speaker Pelosi holds off on sending the impeachment to the Senate at least for a couple of months, because I think the most important thing for Joe Biden to do during his first 100 days or so in office is to deal with the pandemic, to get Congress to pass a relief bill, which he's talking about almost $2 trillion of relief, money in people's hands, money in the hands of state and local governments, dealing with the vaccines, and also a second bill, which would be to jumpstart the economy with an infrastructure plan for jobs. So he's got to deal with the pandemic and the economy. People have to feel like the government is working for them. A lot of the outrage against the government right now is because for 4 years, all we heard from the president was rhetoric, but he didn't accomplish very much. He didn't improve the lives of people. In fact, he made people's lives a lot worse, particularly the thousand people who've died and the millions of people who've been sick. So I think impeachment ought to be put on hold until Biden can get the Congress to pass his two major initiatives on public health and on the economy. And then I think the American people and Congress will be ready to put that fat guy with the red hair where he belongs, which at some point should be in prison.
You mentioned the likelihood that he will be facing a slew of lawsuits as soon as his term in office ends. Obviously, in the early moments after the insurrection, which took place at the Capitol a week ago, there was discussion about invoking the 25th Amendment, and that was largely an attempt to get him out of power as quickly as possible to prevent him from doing further damage. As we have seen events play out, that is probably not going to happen, and we are likely looking at the longer road. In fact, we have already taken the longer road of impeachment. But what is the concern? What is the possibility that Donald Trump will pardon himself for all of the crimes that you just mentioned before he leaves office?
There's a big debate about whether or not he has the authority to pardon himself. He'll probably try to pardon his children and maybe his son-in-law and maybe Rudy Giuliani and a few people. Whether he can pardon himself, if he does pardon himself, that'll go to the Supreme Court. And how right now, despite the fact that he appointed three of them, I'm not sure that they would take his side on his ability to pardon himself. But most of the crimes that he committed before he became president are in state courts. They're not federal courts, and so he can still be put in state prison for these crimes if he's convicted, and that's what he's scared about. It's one reason I think he was so desperate to hold on to power. One, he hates to be a loser, and secondly, he knows that as soon as he's out of power, he's very vulnerable to being imprisoned and or at least convicted of a crime and spending the next couple of years of his life spending a lot of money on lawyers. So he's going to he'll try to continue to be a figure in the Republican Party. A lot of Republicans are going to try to stop him from doing that, and I don't think Pence is going to allow the 25th Amendment. So I think he's going to be president until January 20th. There's a lot of danger he can do, but right now he doesn't. He seems to be consumed with his own survival. So, could he start a nuclear war? Yeah. Although, to be honest with you, I've been pretty amazed at the willingness of the leaders of the military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to basically stand up to Trump. And so, if he tries to execute an order to send Americans into combat in the next week, or to use the nuclear codes, I actually think that the leaders of the military will not follow his order. I think he's a lame duck in many different ways.
Well, certainly we can only hope that cooler, calmer heads will prevail in such a circumstance.
Yeah.
You mentioned Donald Trump's fear of going to prison. Perhaps he should have considered, instead of investing in hotels and golf courses, to maybe build a few prisons of his own that he might have gotten sent to. With that in mind, I think we would go to the interview with Senator Anthony Portantino, and we'll be back right after that.
Okay.
Joining me now is State Senator Anthony Portantino. Mr. Portantino, thank you for joining us this evening. How are you tonight?
I'm great, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you, and thank you for being here. We would like to ask you to share with our viewers at home a little bit more about your career and some of your accomplishments.
Well, I've focused on public education primarily, both in the Assembly and the Senate. And today we actually introduced a bill on youth mental health to help students in K-12 have a curriculum and learn about mental health. And earlier in this session, which started last week, we introduced a bill to create a youth mental health first aid program. So those who work at our schools can recognize the signs of mental health. During COVID, our students have faced amazing challenges, isolation. And so I'm focusing a lot on this session on trying, obviously, we want to reopen our schools and get students back to school healthy, but we also want to make sure that their mental health and well-being is taken care of. And there's a discrepancy in education code between mental health and physical health. And so if a student is home with a mental health issue, bipolar, depression, anxiety, it's not clear that that's an approved absence. So we're also going to be clarifying that mental health and physical health should be treated the same way. You got to destigmatize these things, and you can't treat them differently. So that's some of the focus that we have this session.
It sounds like you're certainly keeping very, very busy. We definitely appreciate all that you're doing. We'd like to turn our attention now, of course, to more recent political events. Obviously, there has been quite a bit that has happened in the last couple of days, but most definitely in the last couple of weeks. And the first question going forward is, what do you envision the federal government to be like in the post-Trump era?
Well, I think first and foremost, statesmanlike, gentlemanly. President-elect Biden is a nice man. Donald Trump isn't and never was. And I think, leadership sets a tone and a mood. And I think that's the biggest shift. We're going to have actually somebody in the White House who actually cares about Americans, somebody in the White House who's actually a patriot, someone who understands love and compassion and empathy versus somebody who is a self-absorbed narcissist who only cares about himself. I think that's going to be the biggest change. Joe Biden is fundamentally a good person. Donald Trump fundamentally is not.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I think you've already made your feelings clear on the matter. But and this might be a redundant question, but I guess it's safe to say that you really don't believe that President Trump has had the country's best interests at heart during his 4-year administration.
Well, let's just look at the pandemic. When was the last time he went on television and tried to give some first accurate information, caring information, or actually had a plan to deal with it? Remember when the pandemic was first brought to his attention, he admitted to downplaying it and went on television and said, we have 15 cases and they're all going to go away. And, now we have 4,000 people who are dying every day. My heart breaks for the families that have lost loved ones during this pandemic, knowing that the models that we've done, if the U.S. had done what Korea did, we'd have 10,000 deaths. If the U.S. had done what Canada had done, we'd have significantly less fatalities. The information was there for our country to deal with this, and unfortunately, we had a president who wanted to downplay it and bragged about downplaying it. My opinion of the man is pretty clear, and frankly, it's based on his own actions. He's the one that went on television and said, inject whatever it was, fluid into your veins, or go outside, and all these crazy magic cures that were snake oil salesmen. He said that. I didn't say that. He downplayed the virus. He hid the information. And now what we had in Washington, he spoke to that crowd before and egged them on. Everything he's getting for his horrible reputation, he did through his own deeds and deserves the reckoning that finally he's getting.
It could easily be argued it is too little, too late, but we have seen reports in the last day or so, or in fact, I should say we have seen videos in the last day or so of the president finally calling for calm, finally trying to denounce some of the violence that has ultimately occurred in his name. And most recently, there are reports coming from the White House now, and these are being reported by major news organizations around the area, that even getting him to make these speeches has been like pulling teeth. It's not something that he wants to do. There have been reports that he has stated openly that he's sorry he did them immediately after doing them. Do you know anything about that?
I know what the major news outlets are reporting, and you're correct. Largely, his lawyers have appealed to him that he has significant legal exposure if he doesn't clean up his act. So again, he's not being motivated by the self-interest of the country or the interests of the country. He's being motivated by the self-interest of Donald Trump. I fully expect a slew of pardons to come out for his family members. I think he's going to try to self-pardon. Everything he does and everything he has done has been about his self-interest, whether it's promoting his business, whether it's promoting his cronies, whether it's pardoning, criminals and other people who, he thinks are supporters of his. I think that's the overriding sadness of this part of our country is America elected somebody who really didn't care about America and didn't care about Americans and basically gave false information to people to manipulate a situation. And I think there's a certain culpability in the press as well. They covered a lot of this stuff instead of dismissing it. Narcissists don't like to be dismissed. And I think there should have been more of a dismissal of him, more of a you've got to be kidding, you're crazy, versus treating it as hard news. And I think it might have been different if he was treated like the 12-year-old child. You give them light and the shiny object and they become more agitated and more excited, where if you just ignore them, they don't. Now, obviously, he's the president of the United States, and it's hard to ignore the president of the United States, but he's been an utter disaster on so many fronts, whether it's the environment, whether it's human rights, when it's dignity, racism, you name it. I think his former chief of staff said it's the first president in history that didn't try to unite the country and spend his time dividing the country. I mean, his own people. And again, they speak out after they left. I think that's the biggest change in the dynamic today than when Richard Nixon was president. When Nixon was president, Barry Goldwater and other conservatives went to him and said, hey, the party's over. Here, people only speak out after they leave the administration or they leave, or they're have announced they're not running for reelection. The courage on the enabler, or the lack of courage from the enablers, to me, they're the more culpable people. The Lindsey Grahams of the world, they're not patriots. They're not folks who care about the greater good. They again care about themselves. And I don't know if you saw today that there was a Republican legislator who said he's going out to buy body armor because he fears for his life. When you have a party that is acting on fear and not principle, there is something structurally wrong with that, and it's horrible. And I feel sad for our country that we endured these 4 years.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Nixon administration and obviously the scandal that befell it. There have been discussions with political insiders of that administration who said that in the aftermath, even Nixon himself was remorseful for what he had done. There are reports that he, at one point, actually was down on his knees asking for members of his staff to pray with him and fearful of what harm he had done to the country. Juxtaposed to that are political insiders in the Trump administration who say he not only has no remorse, he takes no responsibility for the things that he's done.
That's correct. That's correct.
With that in mind, what do you think the legacy of Trump's administration will be, especially in the wake of recent events?
Well, I think he's going to go down as the worst president in American history. I think as historians write the story, he's going to go down as the least patriotic president in history. But I also hope that they hold the enablers account. I mean, for me, Sean Hannity is the least patriotic person on television. I mean, Fox News has enabled this. I mean, somebody said early in the administration, had Fox News existed during the time of Nixon, Nixon would have survived the impeachment. When you have, a half of the country getting its information from a news outlet that doesn't necessarily share the truth and allows opinion columnists to pretend to be hard news or position it that way, even though they know they're not, and then they spew out the propaganda. It's no wonder why there's a segment of the population that actually believes this stuff. Now, for me, it's hard to watch the president and not see him as a flawed person. So I think those individuals, yes, they've been fed bad information, but they also have their own eyes and ears to see a man divide us. Now, truthfully, Fox doesn't always show the worst aspects of Trump when he gives some of his speeches. They don't show the most egregious, racist, inflammatory comments. But there's a personal responsibility, which is ironic because one of the basic tenets of being a Republican is taking personal responsibility. And as you pointed out, Donald Trump takes personal responsibility for nothing. And so he violates one of the most important tenets of republicanism, and yet is the leader of the Republican Party.
Well, moving on to perhaps a light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, in just a few days, we will inaugurate a new president. President Joe Biden will be taking over the country and arguably the mess that is being left behind. What opportunities and challenges await the Biden administration?
Well, I think there are several, and I think that's another place where I think we need real strong reporting. The Trump administration is trying to sabotage a lot of things. They're trying to put in place certain foreign policy goals and objectives that are going to make it difficult for President Biden to undo. They've gutted many, many departments and agencies with, career professionals that care deeply about the country. So I think the President Biden has significant implementation challenges. But I think foremost, though, I think he's accomplished the biggest goal, which is to be a statesman. He is not out there, charging on impeachment. He's not out there charging on divisive rhetoric. He's said numerous times that he's going to represent the whole country, whether you voted for him or you didn't vote for him, whether you're from a red state or a blue state. So I think that's the biggest thing that President Biden, when he becomes President Biden, he'll carry that rhetoric and that passion forward. And I think it's coming from the heart. He is a man who cares. And so the hard part's going to be the mess on the vaccination strategy. Again, Trump basically said, I'm going to leave it to others to do, and didn't take a national approach to it. So you have a state by state approach, you have, delivery issues, you have logistical issues, far less. What did he say? We'd have 20 million people vaccinated by the end of the year, and we're at 2 million. All of his false promises have set up a very difficult situation for President Biden, but I think he's up to the task. I think the country has to be patient. I think we have to give him time to turn the ship into a better and more positive direction.
Before we can get to that point, of course, we have to get through the actual inauguration. Do you foresee any surprises coming on the 20th?
I think we're right to be on alert. We had thousands of Trump supporters storm the Capitol, many of them armed. They found bombs nearby. There was handcuffs and ready to take prisoners and hostages. The Confederate flag flew over the Capitol for the first time in history. The Capitol was seized for the first time since the War of 1812. So I do think that the rabid right-wing white supremacist Trump supporters are capable of anything. And I think now we're actually prepared, or we should have been prepared before. I don't know why we weren't, but I think everybody is on heightened alert. I think the Biden swearing in should go off well. Because I think there's 20,000 troops, which again, what a statement we have to say, that there's 20,000 troops in the Capitol to keep Americans from attacking the American Capitol. It's a sad commentary. I don't consider myself a bomb thrower in these kinds of situations, but I'm so deeply moved and passionate, and so many of my constituents have been contacting me in tears watching the Capitol under siege by these false patriots. It's a sadness.
It's certainly a very, very concerning time for the country as a whole. Senator Portantino, we thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we have run out of time this afternoon, but we do appreciate your being here and want to thank you so much for all the work that you do for our country. You've been watching our interview with Senator Anthony Portantino that was recorded earlier today. We now turn back to our conversation with Occidental College political professor Peter Dreier. Peter, again, thank you for joining us and staying with us this evening.
Sure.
We've all seen the events that took place at the Capitol a week ago and everything that has followed, right up to a second impeachment, which is unprecedented in the history of the United States. Certainly, we have heard a lot of discussion about the great divide between peoples in this country, politically, that is. There are certainly other divides that we could discuss, economic as well. But political is the big ticket of recent discussion. In light of everything that's happened in the last week, 2 weeks, how much damage does this do to the incoming Biden administration?
I think that President Trump is probably the most disgraced president in our history. And there are a lot of people who voted for Trump because, for various reasons, they wanted to protect their views about abortion or gay marriage. Some of them are racist. 45% of Trump's vote were white evangelical Christians who probably cared more about abortion and homosexuality than they did about other issues. But if you look at the public opinion polls, the American people are not that divided when it comes to lots of things the government does. Even the most recent public opinion polls show that, 3/4 or more of the American people think that the super rich don't pay enough taxes. They think the government should do more to protect people's health care. They think the minimum wage should be above the poverty line. 3/4 of American people think that there ought to be more safeguards against unsafe workplaces and against unsafe consumer products. A vast majority of the people who are asked in public opinion polls think that the government should do more to provide people with higher education and make tuition either free or more subsidized. So if President Biden adopts a agenda, which so far this is what he's done, to restore the American economy so that middle-income people can not only put a roof over their head and avoid eviction if they're tenants or avoid foreclosure if they're homeowners, but also get paid a living wage and have healthcare insurance and feel that they can afford to send their kids to college. I think that he will help to restore faith in our democracy and in our government. And that doesn't to say that there aren't a lot of people that are still going to hold on to the Trump cult. But even in the last 5 days, Trump's popularity among identified Republicans has taken a big nosedive. And so definitely there's a Trump cult. It's a cult of personality. It's not unlike the Chinese cult of Mao. It's not about public policy. It's about the kind of bully he is. But I think, and he's not going to fade away. He's going to try as much as possible to stay in the public's eye. But the Republicans are fed up with him. I mean, the people in Congress, many of them. And personally, they know that he's gone off the deep end. But many of these Republicans are afraid of Trump supporting somebody to run against them in 2022 or 2024. But as Trump's popularity fades, he will still be a cult leader in America. But Joe Biden has a real opportunity to help to bring the American people back to the belief that government can work for them. And so I think that, I think Joe Biden he wasn't my number one candidate in the primaries. But I think he's handled himself incredibly well. His appointments so far have been much more progressive than people imagined. He's kept his eye on the prize. He's kept his cool. And if he's able to govern, which means if the Congress will pass his initial legislation on health care and on the economy, and they don't need Republican votes to do that, they can't filibuster on that. There are some things they can filibuster, but not those two things. Then I think the American people will come back to trusting their government again, because Trump is, like I said, the most disgraced president in history. And one other thing about this is, the stereotype of the people that were in the Capitol building last Wednesday and that are planning more terrorist activities and insurrections at state capitals and maybe even in Washington over the next week or so. No, they were not like the Duck Dynasty white working class that people thought. Now that we're getting people arrested, we're seeing these were middle class white people, business people, some people in the military, some people in law enforcement, people with middle class incomes, as I said, mostly white. So they weren't angry about the economy. But the rest of America, the normal America, even the Republicans that think this insurrection went much too far, they are worried about their children's economic and educational futures and their own. And I think and their health and their public health. And if Biden can do something about that by getting Congress to act quickly, then I think Trump will not fade away, but he'll become much less of a nuisance and a political influence in the country. And again, like I said earlier, he's going to spend a lot of time in court. So he won't have that much time to be causing havoc. And of course, he's lost his Twitter handle, which is the one thing that he relied on to stir people up. So, he's not going to disappear, but he's not going to be as disruptive a figure as people feared he might be.
For years, our country has been considered the last great superpower. And certainly in the wake of the melee at the Capitol last week, we have heard world leaders talk about democracy, talk about America's democracy. And certain leaders have mentioned how they look to our country as a shining example of what democracy can and should be. We've heard an awful lot of discussion about Trump's legacy as well. What damage has been done to America's standing outside of the country, on a global level? How do we look to those countries that once considered us the shining symbol of democracy?
Yeah. Well, I would take issue with the idea that most people around the world see us as a shining symbol of democracy. I mean, even before Donald Trump was president, the percentage of the American people that vote in a typical election is much lower than it is in almost every other democracy in the world. And money plays a much bigger influence in our political system than it does in Western Europe or Canada or even Mexico. On the other hand, it is true that people from all over the world come here who are fleeing oppression, and Trump tried to stop that. So I think it really depends on whether the people around the world and the leaders around the world understand that while Trump was president, our reputation around the world cratered, awful. We were a laughing stock. And I think it's going to take a while, but I think given the appointments that President Biden has made to the State Department and other top cabinet posts, and given his own long history of dealing with leaders around the world, I think he's going to be taking a lot of tours around the world, talking to people, and I think he'll be able to restore some of that faith. But we will never be the kind of, as you said, shining symbol of democracy that we might have been before Trump, because what Trump exposed as I said earlier, is how fragile our democracy is. You know, just think about what would have happened if the Secretary of State of Georgia had played along with Trump. Like, you know, he did a lot of bad things, Raffensperger. I mean, he engaged in his own voter suppression, but he stood up to Trump. Some of those judges, including judges that Trump appointed, stood up to Trump. The media, for the most part, except for Fox News and a few other outlets, they stood up to Trump. But if different people had been in those positions and had not stood up to him, you know, he could have been the authoritarian dictator that he wanted to be. And I think that fragility of our democracy and how much depends on the integrity of a few people doing the right thing has really been a wake-up call about how tenuous our democracy is. And I think around the world, people see that.
Well, Mr. Dreier, we only have about a minute and a half left in the show. I wanted to ask you this question, though. Where do you see our nation? What does it look like 4 years from today?
Well, that's a great question. Well, let's assume that the Democrats hold on to the House and the Senate and maybe even expand their margin in 2024 and 2022 in the midterms. Then there's some fundamental problems that we have, and a couple questions have to be raised. One is we had the highest voter turnout in American history, or at least in the last 100 years since we've been counting in this election. I think that's going to continue and it's going to grow. I think people are tired of being apathetic, if that's possible. I think we have to deal with rising wealth and income inequality. Biden has promised to do more to make it easier for workers to join unions, which will do a lot about inequality. He wants to expand healthcare. He wants to deal with the environment and green jobs. If he can do that, then I think the Republican Party will be split. I think we could have an era not unlike the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt. And I think Biden can be the next Franklin Roosevelt, who brought the American people together in the midst of a depression.
Well, Mr. Dreier, we thank you so much. I'm afraid we have run out of time. We'd like to thank Congresswoman Judy Chu, Senator Anthony Portantino, and of course, Occidental College political professor Mr. Peter Dreier for joining us this evening in this discussion. For the viewers at home, if there are topics you would like to see addressed in our discussions, you can email them to us at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Until next time, this has been Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Thank you for watching, and good night.